Now we're going to hear from Phoebe Fico on Access Your Humanity. Thanks. Take it away, Phoebe.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be with you all today. My name is Phoebe Fico, as he said, and just a little background on me. I am a black, queer, visibly disabled woman, so I'm basically the walking, talking poster child for intersectionality. And for those of you who want to know, I have cerebral palsy, specifically spastic diaplegia, which basically means that the lower half of my body is affected. The tone of my muscles is affected, my balance is affected, and my ability to walk is affected to the point where I have to use crutches almost all the time. But I don't really want to talk to you about my disability specifically, but rather how it sort of made me come to realize how much the physical world and the buildings that we build are not actually made for people with physical disabilities, and how when we do include accessible measures like ramps or hand buttons or something like that, the person who are using these accessible measures is not usually taken into account. It's just sort of seen as something they have to do. They have to do in order to abide by the law. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey and how I came to these realizations and how I think we can fix them. So I'm going to start off with when I went away to college. I went away to college 4 years ago in Boston. I went to Boston College, and at first I was super excited to go away to college, get some freedom from my parents like every teenager and go crazy. But the more I started to try and get around campus, the more I realized how inaccessible it was. And the more I got depressed about it. I thought it was my fault. I thought that it was my body's problem that I couldn't get around, not that the campus and the administration didn't want to make it accessible. So I got depressed almost to the point of actually failing out of school. That's how bad it was, because I just didn't go to classes. And so by my second year, when I would come home, people from my neighborhood would ask me, oh, how's school going? How do you like school? And I would usually say, oh, the professors are great and I'm super happy to be getting this education, but, the campus culture is not really for me. And I would sort of leave the interpretation of campus culture up to them, and they would probably think I meant the constant drinking or partying or football games, but to me the campus culture meant something very different. To me, campus culture meant that at best, it was sort of a willful absent-mindedness towards students with physical disabilities, and at worst, it was sort of a virile hostility. They seemed not to care when they forgot to put in a ramp to a building or accessible hand buttons, and what they were doing, whether they cared or not, was essentially barring a student from getting an education, which every student has a right to. Furthermore, when they did remember to put in accessible measures, it seemed like these additions were an afterthought. Like they never actually thought of the person who was going to be using them. Like the campus was not built for us, but simply accommodated for us because it was the law. And while I think it's super vital to have the right slope of a ramp so that a wheelchair person can get, someone who uses a wheelchair can sort of navigate it easily, and that it's super important to have the proper weight of a door so that everyone can open it no matter what their ability, I don't know if you could really call these accessible measures a success if you don't actually consider the person who will be using them. If subconsciously you sort of send the message that these people are less than human. So I'm going to give you a few examples from my school in Boston, and then I'm going to sort of branch it out into New York City as a whole. So here's a building. I will describe it for any of the people, picture of a building. I'll describe it for any of the people who are visually impaired. This is a cream-colored campus building. It has 4 narrow steps at the front of the building, and these steps do not have a handrail, and there are no other visible accessible entrances. And this is a picture of McElroy Hall on campus. And this is one of the most important buildings on campus. It housed one of the main bookstore where you could get all your books, a mailroom, and 2 of the campus's most popular dining halls. So it was super important. But in order to get to the accessible entrance, you would have to go all the way around the back of the building. And to me, this is just not only unintelligent design, but inhumane design. When people with physical disabilities already have a hard enough time walking and navigating the world, why would you make them navigate more just to get into a building? Why wouldn't you put the accessible entrances at the front of the building, just from a physical standpoint? Furthermore, there are many historical connotations of having to go around the back of a building. You know, from the slaves, from the peasants and servants in like medieval England to the segregated African American people in the 60s. To go around the back of the building somehow meant that you were lesser, that you were not a good enough person to go around the front. It sends us a message that we are less than human. Just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, how many of you have had to go around to the back of a building or walk extra to get to an accessible entrance? Yeah, I know I have. Yeah, so in my view, this creates a sort of physical and social segregation of the disabled person. Furthermore, often people forget to upkeep and maintain these disabled entrances, so that if a person needs to use them, they might not actually be available for use. To take the example of McElroy Hall again, very often when it would snow in Boston, they would forget to clean the route, and therefore I could often not get into the building for days at a time. So when I was on main campus and going to class, sometimes I would not eat all day, which sort of made me lose focus, and I couldn't focus in my classes, and just kept me from doing things that keep me alive and being the student that I should be. Another way that they show that we are just an afterthought and not actually thought about when they are actually building the buildings is when they actually decide to do construction and make changes to the terrain. Using my school as an example again, my first year, the quad was completely flat. It was a little uneven, and it had cobblestones, but it was completely flat. And then the next year, when I came back, it turned into this. And again, I'll describe the image for visually impaired people. These are 11 steps that lead up to a courtyard surrounded by university buildings. So what they had effectively done was that they had leveled off the quad, but they had added 11 steps to do this. And so before I came back, there was no notification that this was going to happen, so I sort of just came back and my route was completely changed and my daily routine was completely changed, to the point where if I did not want to go through these steps, I would have to go around, and effectively doubling my time of getting around campus. And this is really important because it was a straight shoot from the library to the dining hall that I previously mentioned. So it was a pretty important route, and now I had to change it and double my time. So while I learned about these issues at school, I sort of started to look for them in other places, like New York City. And like all systematic oppressions, I found that this is actually a widespread problem. The closest to home where I found this was actually in my home, the apartment building where I'd lived my entire life. I actually realized that it's not accessible to people in wheelchairs because the front of the building only has steps that lead down into a courtyard, and then in the back of the building there is a ramp, but it's kind of like a makeshift ramp for deliveries. It doesn't really comply with ADA standards, and they just sort of left it there so you could say, oh, here's a ramp that we have. And then another example is from October 2013 to May 2014, there was a $21 million renovation on the Middletown Road Station. And these renovations included replacing floors, installing a fire alarm system, and replacing stairs in this train station, but they failed to make any of it accessible. They didn't replace any, they replaced all of these things, even made the stairs better, but why couldn't they put in an elevator? And I know what you're thinking in terms of the New York subway system. These are old stations. They've been here forever. Most of them are outside of the ADA regulations for buildings and things like that. But I can tell you, I've been to Rome, and there's an elevator in the Colosseum. So I'm sure if you can put an elevator in the Colosseum, you can put elevators in the New York subway system. And just for some statistical numbers, only 19% of the New York City subways are actually accessible, while both Washington, D.C. subway systems and San Francisco subway systems are 100% accessible, and Boston's is 65% accessible. So I think we can do it if we want to be a city for all people. And just a little update on this case specifically, the city is currently facing a lawsuit because of this. So just in summation, what are some of the problems I think that we face when it comes to access? They don't consider us when actually building new structures, and when they do put accessible measures into a building, they don't consider the people who will actually be using them. So I'm just going to give you now some sort of solutions that I think could possibly help. I'm going to start with some long-term solutions and then go on to some more short-term solutions. So as far as long-term solutions, I think one of the main problems is that the ADA is a complaint-based law. And I think one of the things that needs to be changed is we actually need to have people who go around and check up and see if these things are actually accessible so that people don't have to file complaints themselves. I think it should be almost like the same way in which we check if restaurants are up to health code. We need people to check if buildings are up to accessibility codes. And I think it's supremely important that the people who do this checking are actually people with disabilities, so that they can not only say if this is up to ADA code, but is this the best way to do it for a person with a disability? Furthermore, I think we need severe fines for buildings that do not comply with ADA regulations, but full tax reimbursement for those that do meet requirements. You do get some tax reimbursement, but not all. Yeah, and then in terms of the short-term requirements, I think it's really important to file complaints when you can. Also go around and take pictures of all the inaccessible places that you see, and then just like post it on social media, like Instagram or Facebook. I think one of the main issues is that people don't have to think about it if they're not disabled themselves, or if they don't have someone close to them who's disabled. I mean, that's what privilege is. You don't have to think about something. So I think just alerting people that this is an actual issue. I think before this election, people weren't even thinking about disability. So yeah, and I think it's really important in your post to not only explain it from an ADA perspective, but a human perspective and how this affects your life, because I think people don't really relate to statistics, they relate to people. And that's exactly what I think we need to do here, is relate to the person who's actually using it, and we need to access our humanity. Thank you very much. Question?
I have a question on using like Instagram or kind of a photo site for sharing an accessibility issue. Is there have you done that on a site, or could you give an example of like a way to write up something on Instagram?
I haven't done that, but I think I haven't done that because, like, for me, to take photos is a bit hard because I use my arms to walk. But I think in terms of writing up a photo description, just to be like, like, this is ridiculous. This thing stopped me from getting to the grocery store, and I couldn't get my groceries, and I couldn't make myself dinner. So then I had to buy myself dinner and waste money.
Yeah. I think it's a good idea because I just recently had a trip to Mall of America, for example, and I saw that they wrote back on my Instagram message. Brand people are looking at that channel, so I think that's an interesting idea for reporting access issues. I've never seen that on a site myself, but I'd be interested to try that.
Anything else?
I worked on a similar project, and we created a list of a guide for business owners on how, a clear guide for business owners on how to be accessible and what accessible features are, and resources for making their businesses more accessible. Have have you looked at that, like what resources are available for business owners and to share that with them?
Not specifically, no. These are just sort of general ideas that I
Yeah.
have. I haven't really put them into practice quite yet.
Okay.
But yeah, that would be great to utilize that resource.
MOPD has some
Yeah.
listed on their site.
Yeah.
There's also some interactive, if I may interject, there's some interactive sites that do, and Jessica can speak to this too, but that you can indicate inaccessible restaurants or other public accommodations. And there's something that just launched in Washington DC about actually pedestrian ramps, and it's a user interface where you can go in and click on the space through Google Maps to say yes, this is accessible, it's not, et cetera, et cetera.
What is it, MOPD?
Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities.
There's also Vision Zero, which is, the whole purpose is to make sure there are no deaths by accidents, so that you can report to them any issues with intersections, any changes that need to be made, and for accessibility as well as just safety in general.
And John Schimmel, who's a member of the group too here at NYU, came up with Access Together, and with some of his friends. That's a really good one. I guess you just put in, find places nearby that are accessible. Or you can put in, like you just went into a restaurant, and you can kind of rate it yourself on its accessibility. But one of the things that John would point out, and that I'd point out as a former business owner, so my business was in the Heights, and those buildings are notoriously like inaccessible. I had steps down into my building. And I put a ramp there that cost me about $3,000. Nobody funds, nobody supports you when you do this. There's no, you can take it off your taxes supposedly, but that's about it. You're still gonna cough up $3,000. And the ramp was wasn't as long as it should be according to the ADA. So that means that if you actually wanted to put it in, the ramp would have to be 20 feet long and go into the sidewalk and almost to the street. But I put it in, and the mayor's office, not the mayor's office, but some other people from the city came over, and they were gonna sue me because they said that my ramp wasn't fitting the code. But according to the ADA, if you have an old building and you tried your best, you tried your best. So all the people that I knew in wheelchairs were gonna go down to the city and say, this is accessible, for God's sakes, leave it alone. So it's kind of ironic. What I'm saying is that you have to work with local businesses, and we have to ask them to help and tell them that it matters. Forcing is important when they're not gonna listen. But it's also important to open a dialogue and just talk to people, because they try, especially, we want some compassion, we want them to think about it, right? Because we're not talking about new buildings, they have to comply, we're talking about the old buildings that you would like access to, everybody would like access to, I agree.
The better business model is a better way of, instead of attacking people,
Yeah.
we should be hearing them and educating them and giving them resources.
I think there's room for both sides of the equation, that there's room for activism, and that's very important.
Yep.
And there's room for diplomacy, and there are different times when those things work best. So I applaud all the advocates and activists out there, and also I echo the sentiment that we be compassionate. So there's a time and place for everything, certainly.
I wanted to say thank you for sharing your experience. I've actually done a bit of research around accessibility in college campuses. I actually presented at the last Ally NYC meetup about this. And one of the things when I was doing the research around it was there wasn't a lot of people speaking out against their experiences when they were trying to get their education. And most colleges don't really do a lot that they should be doing, especially because the student base as time goes on is going to get more and more diverse. And by making things like that, like a quad, and raising it up for no reason, you're alienating all these students. So I just want to say thanks for sharing your story.
An old campuses can be modified. Brooklyn's college, the students at Brooklyn College about 10 years ago went crazy and just blocked the entrance, and they fought, and they changed the whole entrance to one of the oldest buildings on campus, now fully accessible. So I don't understand why Boston couldn't do it, and they're the city of accessibility, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. And it's ironic, their motto is men and women for others. And very clearly not holding up that motto.
I had the experience back in 2001. I was in college. The campus was building a brand new building. It was going to hold the lunchroom, the student library, bookstore, and everything else. And I was very concerned. I used a white cane, and the sidewalks, wherever there were steps, because this campus was on a hillside, and I actually reached out and communicated with the people in charge of getting this done. And I said, please tell me which one of the doors has the accessibility button. And I said, by the way, can I ask you, which is the accessible sidewalk? Because I had already discovered that if I wanted to get to buildings, let's say there's A, B, and C, and I want to get to B, but the accessible door is on that side, and I'm coming from over here, now I got to go around this building in order to get to the, and so and I knew there were people in scooters and wheelchairs doing the same thing. And when I reached out and asked about the sidewalk going down there, because I'm like, I see steps going down there, and the only other one is the parking lot. How are we getting, we got to go all the way to the parking lot to get to the accessible door. And when I raised that issue, they instantly went ahead and they built this little ramp around the staircase on that hillside. After which, of course, while the building's done, and they're filling it up with all the stuff, everybody that's going to be moving into the new building is going there. What do you think that ramp was being used for? All the carts in campus going into the new building. So it's almost always accessibility for one purpose, makes it easier for almost everybody, and becomes intuitive and built in and a part of our thing. And there's in web design in that campus, so they make the building accessible, but there are components connecting. We always have connectors. Can't tell you how many kinds of things I use as a visually impaired person, and I know enough about IT to know that, okay, you scrubbed that page, you ran that checker, and it's accessible. Can I get to the next page? So everybody's running their single pages through, and then the links are broken. Or they take you somewhere else, or maybe it's an app that you use some unique type of thing, and you want to get to another page, and that piece doesn't work. And that's when I know that they didn't test it for usability. And so there's a lot of times the littlest thing will actually make something completely unusable or unbearably difficult, and you'll avoid it.
Yeah.
So it's a great points to bring up.
Yeah, just to speak to the idea of like building a new building and not making it accessible. Actually, again, I think it was my junior year, they built a whole new building that was going to house the English department and the history department. And they put these giant heavy wooden doors on the building, I suspect because they looked nice. And they simply, quote unquote, forgot to put in hand buttons for the doors. So now one of my friends who's in a wheelchair and doesn't have full use of her hands couldn't open the doors to this new building that was going to house all the classes of her major.
There's a group in Ontario that I heard about last year, and they have something called Stopgap. It's stopgap.ca. And it's based on the statement, the curse of the one step. And what they do is they go around and they build ramps for small businesses that couldn't afford it themselves. They build ramps because of that one, to make that one step that bars people from being able to enter. Now people are able to enter. So it's stopgap.ca. I don't see why New York can't do that.
Because they're not actually compliant. They're not ADA compliant. So MOPD also has an initiative called One Step that's not, I mean, conceptually it's the same idea,
Right.
but I know that those are not, like the grade is not quite always right. And I think it speaks to the same issue that this gentleman was talking about. Not to say that what that person's doing in Canada is very cool.
Right. Well, it's just in fact one of the things that they say. They know that it's not. I like to say they're not boiling the ocean, but they're doing enough to get. And their ramps are all brightly colored. They paint them all like brightly colored to bring awareness, and then it's like a house of cards eventually.
Just to say one thing in support of what you said, I think that it's not just mobility problems that are solved by ramps and stuff like that. It's also if you're visually disabled, you know, it's a lot less it's a lot harder to fall down a ramp. You know?
Exactly.
You know, I would really, I always prefer to go down ramps than to you know, I'll go out of my way to go to a ramp.
Yeah,
You know?
me too.
So I really feel like, you know, when you do these things, you are really helping everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Question. Oh, yeah. I can't see. So just yeah, I can't see where you are. So just
Sorry.
that's okay. Oh yeah.
I think that's interesting about the ramps and it being easier to use by blind people. And I have a photo I'll share with the group at some point later. But a few years back in my town, at the high school, they actually have a ramp so that you can get to the building. But unfortunately, the button you have to press in order to get access, to have someone open the door for you, was not at that door. It was at the other side of the several doors down to the left where there were only steps access. So technically you still could not get in. And of course there were signs that were printed and posted that told you to go over there to press for the security button. So I would think a blind person would also have a problem with it as well, because if they used the ramp, they would have no idea that there was no button to be found and where it was.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it might be technically accessible, but is it the best option? Clearly, that was just unintelligent design.
One more question over here.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Johnson.
Oh, it's more a comment. Just to piggyback on what you were just saying. That I lovingly call things cosmetic braille, because it's a sign that's been put up. And you know, no blind person is going to know that it's there. There was a hot tub at the 3 companies ago that I worked at, and they had instructions on safety for the hot tub in braille. So yes, it was available, but it was on some pillar distant from the hot tub. First of all, why would a blind person think to look on a pillar for these instructions? So it's one of these things, and I get people are just, they're either in a rush or they just want to meet the compliance laws. It's also like hotel room signs. There's a very swanky hotel here in New York that has braille signage, but the floor I was on was all wrong. And I was like, so I did end up mentioning to them, but it's just one of those things. People are just doing it to meet the law. There's no quality checking, and there's no does it make sense to put it here? And then the other thing is, how do we make sure that people with disabilities, for the buildings that have actually invested in accessible features, we need to create, whether it's an app or something, so that people can instantly know this building has X and Y features. Because I'd hate to think that buildings are investing in some really great stuff, wanting to do the right thing, but no one's using it because they don't know it's there.
Exactly.
I'm going to pause this here. Let's continue the conversation. This is really vibrant and awesome that we're having these conversations, but we need to take a little break. So we're going to take 10 minutes, and when we're back, we will hear from Michelle. Are you next? Yes, 3 o'clock. Okay. Thanks very much. 10 minutes.